recreate it. So I don't know.
So you're saying that they maybe changed it once it was posted?
Are you talking about the photo booth? I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah. Are you saying you think they changed it once it was posted?
No, everything looks good from our end. So like I was able to take a picture of myself and post it this morning. Okay. So I think it's either a pop-up blocker or something else going on. So I can't do it from my computer, but I can do it from my phone because for some reason the photo booth won't recognize my camera, but the link still works. So I was able to get to the link.
Okay. It might be on there. I'm gonna have some folks who are gonna be mad at me if I'm not able to do the Facebook Live. So how do we figure that out? I don't see it on my screen.
Okay, so click more.
There is no more. It has me as a regular guest.
So here's what has to happen then. I'm going to make you host.
Okay.
But I need to remain as co-host because I have to share my screen with the video. Okay.
Thank you. And there is a 2:15 Eastern panel where I'm doing the exact same thing, Facebooking Live. That general sessions panel.
Okay.
So that's the one where you have Brazilian folks come in. So I want to make sure are you going to be on that panel too as well?
Yep.
Okay. So we'll do the same thing. Andre, how you doing?
I'm okay. How are you? Sorry about that. Somebody called, right? As you started speaking. So I do have one question. I just checked. Is it okay to get screen sharing capability?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Now,
actually, now you've got all the capabilities, Sekou, because you're host.
Okay. Let me say this real quick before it's asking me to sign into AdvanceNet to do the Facebook Live. So I got to find the AdvanceNet link. Or I can Facebook Live from my account. I don't know.
Right. You have to link your account to it.
My personal account?
Or the NCOPS account. Wherever you want to Facebook Live it to.
Got it. Did you allow Andre to share?
I can't. You've got all of the powers because you're host.
You're host.
Okay. Andre, you should be able to share now.
Let me see. Yeah, I'm good. Thanks.
I gave up all my magical powers, Sekou.
All right.
How are you doing, Ollie? You're muted, by the way.
I'm doing well. Good morning to you and to everyone. So excited to be on the panel. And so forgive me if I use my introduction to be a hype man.
Yeah. Ollie, I have to do some troubleshooting. I'm sorry with Angela.
Yeah.
She's not allowing me to when I go to my screen, this is my YouTube page. When I try to do a Facebook.
I'm seeing Zoom right now, like your sort of like Zoom login, your corporate login.
Yes.
Okay, go to.
And I'm doing it. Yeah, I promised Diane that I would do some trying.
Yep. So it's asking you what you want to do Facebook Live with, or what's it asking you?
Let me try this again one more time. I'm sorry, folks. Let me just sign in real quick. And somehow the AdvanceNet Zoom account is interfering with my own Zoom account.
so log out of that Zoom account. Then when it opens up and it thinks you're AdvanceNet, go up in the upper right-hand corner and click My Account or the little icon and click Log Out. And then you can log back in as yourself.
Okay, I'm signed out.
Issue.
So when I still try to log in, I'm trying to figure out how to do this, Angela. When I'm still trying to log in, this is what I get. That's what I get when I try to log through the Facebook Live feed.
And you're in your own account.
Yes.
I mean, I can try it. Do you want to give me back host? But the last time I did it, I had to have edit permissions to the page. I had to be added as a Facebook host or whatever.
I can give you my Facebook. I can give you my Facebook information, but I don't know if you want my login information.
I mean, that might be the only way we can do it though. Let me log out of Facebook. Do you want to just send it to me in the chat privately?
Yeah, I think I'll do that as well.
Don, I don't think I've ever seen your office.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in the office.
Nice. You sound good. You look good. Ali, you look good. Is it Ishmael?
Yes.
Can we have you test your camera and your audio while we're getting this set up, the Facebook Live?
Okay. 1 second. I have to get my mic. 1 second.
Okay. You sound good.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, I'll just stick with that then. I want to keep it. I usually have a headphone because I'm in my basement and my son is in school right next door. So.
Gotcha. You sound good. You look far away, but
okay. Yeah. Well, I have a camera. This is my teaching setup, so I can move it a little closer.
Ah.
It's
Are you sharing slides at all? Is anyone sharing slides?
No.
No. Andra, are you sharing slides?
Yes, I am sharing slides.
Okay, and you know how to do that?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Ishmael, I kind of like that setup. I don't have enough room to set up a whiteboard, but
I know, yeah, but the problem is you're right on the whiteboard and it's backwards, so you're like.
Oh yeah. Well, you can mirror your screen and flip it.
Yeah, I know. I was been struggling to do this, and so. But yes, it's
give me a second, Angela.
Yep.
You know, you always forget your Facebook page number when you don't use it. So it's one of those situations I have to test it.
You know what else though? I bet you we can't stream until we go live. Until we take the webinar live, it won't let you stream. That's why. I'm going to give you back host.
Okay. And I'm going to forward you the information just in case there's.
Okay. Well, maybe you took host back already. I don't know who host is, but it's not me anymore. Oh, Sekou, you've got it. So when we take the webinar live, it should work. And we've got some time to play with it because the video is close to 8 minutes long.
Okay, folks, we're showing a pre-video. So let me at least get so the pre-video, there's participants seeing, no one's seeing this video, or they're seeing the pre-video.
Diane, we cannot hear you. And Diane, I don't see you in the meeting.
Should I ask the speakers to present for 10 to 15 minutes?
And I don't see Vincent Hutchings either.
Is it possible to resend the link to make sure folks could find it? Because I had I had a few challenges locating it, but I did get it. But
Sekou, I need to take host back. Can you give me host back? Getting the speakers in is more important than the Facebook live stream. I'm sorry.
How do you do that? How do I give you post back?
Click on the 3 little dots in the video by my name.
Oh, got you. I got you. That's right. You should have host now.
Thank you. So Diane, I'm not even seeing you in the meeting, but you can hear us. Can you confirm that you can hear us? And the link wouldn't have let you into the meeting if it was a bad link.
Diane has to be promoted to a panelist, Angela.
Right, but
she's an attendee still.
Oh, there she is. Okay.
Yeah.
There we go. Let me find Vincent too. I don't have Vincent. I have user.
Okay.
And there are some, yeah.
Good morning.
So Vincent may be in the same category.
Do you know how he's logged in? Because I've got somebody named user in the waiting room.
He logged in the same way I did, which is that I was an attendee, but not, somebody didn't send us the right link. So
that's the link you got from Zoom?
Somebody sent us a link last evening, and that was the only link that either of us saw. So we used that, and Sekou figured out that we were listed as an attendee, and it let me enter. So that's the link I got from Vincent. So I'm sure that's what he's doing.
I had it sent directly from Zoom to you all, so I'm confused as to why it didn't go. I will resend.
Yeah, well, we're all confused here today. So.
If there's a is Vincent relatable to user? No.
I used the link that he sent me.
I just send him a chat. Angela, just as a backup, I sent you our Facebook information in case that doesn't work.
Okay. I just sent Vincent the link again.
The same link that you sent him last night?
I sent it directly from the system. So
that's what I used to get on, but it didn't get me fully in. So he's probably out there somewhere among the attendees.
I'm looking at the users, and the only person I see that doesn't have a name assigned is called user. I can promote user.
I sent user a text and then asked if that was Vincent, but nobody's answering. So
I'm going to go ahead and promote them to a panelist, and we'll see.
Yeah, promote user. That might be him.
All right.
That would be really funny.
Is Mena supposed to be a presenter?
No.
Okay. Friend named user, can you unmute please and tell us who you are? We're looking for Vincent. So we've got Diane.
Oh, I think Andra, that's not Vincent.
We don't have Vincent.
No, I don't think so. There he is.
There's Vincent.
Vincent. All right.
Good morning, Vincent.
Excellent.
You may want to take the user back then.
Yeah.
Nabs, I sent you the Facebook information as a backup in case my Facebook Live doesn't.
Okay. Vincent, can you talk so that we can test your audio, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Sekou, tell me when you want me to start the pre-session video.
Right now. Oh, well.
Then just want to know though whether or not you want to take the session live. And if you all know, then once you're live, who goes when?
That's Ollie's. I'm gonna give introductory remarks to the conference. Are you showing the video right now?
Not yet. I haven't taken the webinar live yet.
I'm gonna give introductory remarks to the conference, then turn it over to, I believe, is it Ollie or Don?
To me.
Then turn it over to Ollie.
I'll do the welcome, and then Ollie does the. Okay. If Ollie wants to do the welcome, then I'm not necessary.
No, you are necessary. What are you gonna do, Don?
I was just gonna do a welcome remarks, and then turn it over to you to do the opening plenary.
Okay,
and just note that the time crunch is basically Sharon also says she can't hear us.
No, that was Sharon was asking whether, she said, I hope you can't hear me. And I was writing her to say, I can't hear you.
Okay.
You're okay.
So I believe that that we are live right now, even though we didn't mean to have the session go live. I'm going to hide my video and mute myself, and I'm going to start the pre-session
Angela,
video.
You're going to make me a co-host to share Facebook Live?
Please, my students are out there waiting. And I sent it to a number of other sets of people, some of our grad students and so forth. So.
Angela, did you hear me that? Did you hear me?
Yep, I did it.
I'm still not co-host. There you go.
All right, I'm going to start sharing the video.
Okay. Angela, I'm still not able to do Facebook Live. Can you do that for me?
You have to make me host again. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'll try. I'll do my best. I'm going to go ahead and start the video.
The year 2020 brought a new challenge every day. Each moment was as unique and diverse as the shades of our skin. We saw politics up close and personal. Our response? Name our pain and speak up to make change.
We have amplified the voices of African-American political scientists, not only in the United States, but globally.
But the pressing issues of the day are issues that unfortunately seem not to go away. These issues keep re-emerging, resurfacing.
White supremacy, racism, Islamophobia, neo-imperialism. I mean, these are big, broad words, but these are realities of our world right now.
As a political scientist, I, like many others, watch the news, read social media, and often come away shocked and dismayed at our current political and social climate.
You can't have a system that says what? For the people, by the people, and of the people, when you got a veto over the people.
The protests are pretty much always effective. It's just that Black political leadership moved away from using protests. So this effective tool is used more rarely.
All of these inequities are growing even more large, and these chasms are widening. It's almost disheartening sometimes just to see and know what was going on before, and that's exacerbated now in the world that we are in.
I mean, we can talk specifically about inequality and wealth, but we should also talk about inequality in terms of being able to access food, being able to access sanitary shelter. These inequalities are persistent in the U.S. society and other societies at large.
Another pressing issue, I would say, is economic relief. A lot of people in our communities are suffering due to the effects of this, unforeseen pandemic.
I'm constantly trying to straddle that line of do I need to do this career as a diversity and inclusion consultant as a way to make money so that I can live a sustainable life, or should I just go all the way into the art that's really important to me, like this Black liberation work that I'm doing?
2020 was a year like no other. Pain, trauma, and unrest all across the diaspora. We longed for meaningful change and relief, then saw history as the first Black woman was elected to the United States Vice Presidency.
We just came out of this election. So, of course, the 2020 election is definitely, as a political scientist, is definitely on your mind, because I say it's the election that won't go away.
It's a continuation of the legacy of Black women and their political work. And Black women saying, okay, it's time, right? It's time that we have not just only a symbolic seat at the table, but a real seat at the table.
To see a Black woman ascend to position of vice president, in a lot of ways, it shows, you know, all the work that Black women have been doing, right?
Now that, you know, we have a new administration in the White House, I am trying to see how do we move forward past the 4 years where we clearly had some white nationalist tones coming out of the White House.
It's been sort of difficult for many of us, you know, living through a pandemic at the same time that we are going through an election where there's questions about the survival of democracy in the U.S.
I look forward to these young activists being impactful on the state and local level and not just on the federal level.
It's your time to release all that is in you that will make the world better. Now more than ever, we need the skills and the know-how that you've developed.
As chair of the membership committee, I am extending a very special invitation for you to join us as a member of the National Conference of Black Political Scientists.
Africans, African descended peoples, peoples of color can feel a safe space to express their understandings of the political history of our communities, the struggles that we face.
I think it's really great to have, again, this liberated zone where all of these, yes, intellectuals, yes, professionals are coming together, but more importantly, these family members are welcoming people back. And it almost felt like a formal family reunion.
Every time Haynes saw me, he greeted me with a loud shout of my rich cousin, Paula. That was what, and it didn't matter where we were or how many people were around. This is what Haynes would yell out. Okay, so I didn't have to figure out, oh, I know that's Haynes, right? But that was, as you know, that's the kind of person that Haynes was. Very gregarious, giving, generous.
It's been a reunion. Every year we come back and we meet old friends.
To have that type of fellowship is comforting. It is as if everyone at that conference is lifting you.
It's important to have Black scholars around that can say, hey, this is the way to go. You know, and I've been grateful that I've had a lot of Black scholars that have come along and said, I'll hold your hand, I'll show you the way.
Also gave me this confidence because I was in a space that was created for me.
We hope to see you at our conference in March, but if not, please consider becoming a member of our very special community. Hello, my name is Dr. Dorian Brown Crosby, and I'm a political scientist at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia. Because of NCOPES, I am connected to a strong network of resources and friends. We invite you to join us so that you can do the same. Please consider joining the National Conference of Black Political Scientists, or NCOPES. We invite you to join us because we are excited about the expertise and passion you'll bring to our organization. Thank you.
Greetings. How's everyone doing? Just give us a second. Okay. Greetings. My name is Dr. Sekou Franklin. I'm the president of the National Conference of Black Political Scientists. Thank you for joining us at the 52nd annual meeting. This is our first virtual conference, and I can tell you it's one of the most challenging that we put together. Our conference theme is Black Politics and Black People as a Conscience of Nations. The conference theme reflects the spirit of Black politics and the spirit of resistance, and celebrates the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Congressional Black Caucus. Before moving forward, I want to recognize the Executive Council and their wonderful work. I also want to recognize our Vice President, Tiffany Willoughby Herard, who will also be inaugurated as our president on Saturday. Also, many thanks to Dr. Kathy Stromal Golden, our executive director, and really the soul force of the National Conference of Black Political Scientists. And thanks to our conference chairs, Gladys Mitchell-Walthauer, Don Wargs, and Ollie Johnson, for the monumental task of putting together this conference. Finally, I want to take a moment of silence and meditation in honor of our members who have passed away since our last meeting, Drs. Lucius Barker, Elijah Wally Miles, Keith Kamu Jennings, Lolita Gray, and Erica Gordon. If we could take a moment of silence. Thank you. If I missed anyone, please put the person's name in the chat room and make sure we give that person a moment of silence. Before turning over to our conference chairs, just some housekeeping issues. We are trying to work to let live stream this on Facebook. It's going to take some technical maneuvering in the next 5 minutes, so just bear with us, and we'll try to get that together as well. Also, please navigate the website, the conference website, before you actually deliver a panel. The website can be, it's new. Delivering a conference is new to many members, so planning for your conference and planning for the website is particularly important. If you are a panelist and if you're registered for the conference, you will receive login information for your panel. You can also pre-schedule panels that you want to attend in the conference portal, and please use the chat room to troubleshoot technical difficulties. The staff members on call to ask any questions. We have a virtual photo booth and an exhibit booth for you to also take full advantage. And please mark the business meeting tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. in your calendar. Finally, our conference administrators, AdvancedNet, will be adamant about staying on schedule. So all panels must begin and end on time. And please, please don't be offended if they have to shut down a panel that's 15 minutes over. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our conference co-chair, Dr. Don Wargs. And again, we're going to try to navigate the technical issue to get this on Facebook Live.
Thanks, Sekou. On behalf of Gladys and Ollie and myself, I would like to welcome you all to this year's meeting of the National Conference of Black Political Scientists. We've been honored to have had the privilege to serve as program co-chairs. And while this past year we've been swimming in unfamiliar waters, we're excited. We're really excited to see the hard work of so many people finally come to fruition. And we are appreciative of all the support and all the help that we've gotten from NCOPE's leadership, Sekou, Tiffany, and Kathy, as well as the various folks who have volunteered their time, section chairs, panel chairs, discussants, et cetera, all the folks who worked so hard already and will be working hard throughout this conference to make this a success. It is our hope that by coming together as a community, we will engage and support each other so that we can feel inspired and strengthened and reinvigorated. And so we welcome everyone. We welcome you all to this new virtual world where we are hope, we are poised and we are ready to engage and to support and to leave here strengthened in terms of our commitment and just ready to continue our efforts to contribute to the resolution of the many challenges that confront Black people in the United States and around the world. So welcome. I now turn to Ali Johnson and our colleagues on the opening plenary. Thank you.
Somebody was shaking their head, so I thank you for that heads up. Don Wargs and Gladys Mitchell-Walthour have been relentless in their commitment to make this a great meeting, a meeting similar, comparable to all of our previous meetings. And they have succeeded, and I want to thank them and recognize them. Words do not do justice to the work of President Sekou, President-elect Tiffany, our leader, Kathy, and all the other folks in executive positions in the organization. I am proud to be a member of NCOPS. Again, my name is Ali Johnson. I'm chair and professor in the Department of African American Studies at Wayne State University. I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers. And because they are so accomplished, I'm not going to go into in-depth introductions. I'm just going to do a collective introduction and then one sentence titles. These speakers that you're going to hear this morning represent the best and brightest of American political science. They are outstanding scholars, teachers, and activists in their own right. I have had the pleasure of hearing them speak. I've had the honor of speaking to them individually. I believe it was the last NCOPS meeting, the one before, and every time I saw Vincent Hutchings, he would say, wealth inequality, that's the problem, wealth inequality. And I've had similar interactions with the other members. Our speakers have won numerous awards, numerous honors, so many that I can't list them. Similarly, they've published numerous books, articles, and book chapters. I encourage you to check out their work. It will be a gratifying and fulfilling experience. They are here this morning to talk about how did we get here, the 2020 presidential election. As my brother Don said, it's been a heck of a year. It has been a heck of a year, but I'm looking forward to their presentations, and I'm sure we'll all be enriched as a result. Our first speaker is Diane Pender-Hughes, Notre Dame Presidential Faculty Fellow and Professor in the Department of Africana Studies and Political Science. She holds a concurrent faculty appointment in American Studies, is a faculty fellow in the Kellogg Institute, and is a research faculty member in gender studies at the University of Notre Dame. She's also the chair of the Department of Africana Studies and a personal mentor to me. Our next speaker will be Andra Gillespie, Professor of Political Science and Director of the James Weldon Johnson Institute at Emory University. Andra has been an inspiration because of her writing, research, service, just covering, again, all fronts. Following Andra will be a younger brother named Ishmael White. He's currently professor of politics and public affairs at Princeton University. And he received his BA in political science from Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and his PhD in political science from the University of Michigan. Our final speaker is Vincent Hutchings, Diversity and Social Transformation Professor, Haynes Weldon Jr. Collegiate Professor of Political Science and Afro-American and African Studies. He's right down 94 from me, and he's been a longtime leader in the field and in NCOPES as well. I would like to ask each speaker to talk for about 10, 15 minutes. And again, thank you for being here with us. Diane?
Okay, good morning all. Thank you, Sekou Franklin. Thank you, Gladys, Mr. Walthour, and thank you, Don Warks. It's an honor to be here today and also an exciting one. And we're all learning how to, another new part of learning in terms of the pandemic, being live on NCOPES and Facebook and so forth. And my students are supposed to be on Facebook Live, but they're saying they can't get in, they don't know where to go. I'll do my panel first and then get to you. So I'm not going to be sharing my screen for this talk. I decided I would play the senior faculty member on the panel and reflect and put some things together, but no screen sharing. So just memories. Years ago, in the months leading up to the 2008 presidential election, our friend and colleague, Melissa Harris Lacewell, loved the ticket, the Obama-Biden ticket, and used to repeat the combination a lot. I remember that. She used to say, Obama-Biden, Obama-Biden, Obama-Biden. I remember that. Can't tell you where or when, but don't have the footnote. So it's ironic that Biden has followed Obama, with Trump in between, as the next newly elected Democratic president. So my question for this panel is, will there be American democracy? This sort of Elsie Scott's question. After the January 6th Capitol Hill insurrection, it's a question I must ask. Let me try to ask the question another way. Will the Republican Party continue to work in the direction that it has been moving in the last few years, especially in the wake of the Trump presidency? Well, one of our major parties defined democracy, and it seems they're already doing this, to mean that white voters are more important, that only white votes, not Black votes, count in deciding upon the US's electoral outcomes. Just this morning on NPR, Minnesota Congresswoman Ilhan Omar said when asked about working with her Republican colleagues in the US House now, especially those who voted not to confirm the results of the Electoral College at the end of the day after the insurrection, she said, quote, "It's a fractured relationship. There's a lot of mistrust among lawmakers. Conversations about voting for bills sponsored by those who objected to a functioning democracy. It's really hard being there. People now feel it's like January 6th has left a dark cloud. A lot of us aren't interested in continuing. We know that political violence and rhetoric that appeals to political violence doesn't just disappear. It has to be addressed," unquote. I mean, I remember when people used to say in political campaigns that Washington is broken. Washington is broken now. The efforts of Donald J. Trump and so many of his supporters who emphasized the big lie that where Black voters were active and turned out in large numbers, that there was fraud or inappropriate electoral behavior, and so damaging that the voting results are not to be trusted. So will the Republican Party continue to follow Trump, and to do so in such an intense way that they will oppose every aspect of the Biden presidential agenda? We've seen them doing that so far. All Republican senators voted against the $1.9 trillion virus relief, the American Rescue Plan bill last week. And yesterday the vote in the House was 220 to 211, with all Republicans voting against it, One Democrat voted against it. One Republican did not vote. Nancy Pelosi, the speaker, marked the passage with her hammer, of course, and with a very slight shimmy of her hips, which, if you haven't seen, is worth looking for. We've seen the voting results, the results of judicial review of the procedures and outcomes of elections. And as we know, no court upheld the charges brought by President Trump and his supporters. In the days after the January 6th insurrection, when the Congress certified the results of the Electoral College vote, many states, Southern as well as Northern, Eastern as well as Western, have worked very hard to change existing election laws. The Brennan Center for Justice reports that states, Southern as well as Northern, Eastern as well as Western, have been introducing a significant number of new pieces of voting legislation. So this is an example of the kinds of challenges we're facing. The center reports, and this is a quote from a recent report, in a backlash to historic turnout, voter turnout in the 2020 general election, and grounded in a rash of baseless and racist allegations of voter fraud and election irregularities, legislators have introduced well over 4 times the number of bills to restrict voting access as compared to roughly this time, same time last year. 33 states have introduced, pre-filed, or carried over 165 restrictive bills this year as compared to 35 such bills in 15 states on February 3rd, 2020. Of course, other state lawmakers are seizing on an energized electorate and persistent interest in democracy reform, which is likewise reflected in Congress. 37 states have introduced, pre-filed, or carried over 541 bills to expand voting access. So there's a lot of work to restrict access, but there's also work to expand access. And when you compare that to last year's numbers, 541 bills filed this year to expand compared to 188 bills that were filed in 29 states as of February 3rd, 2020. 125 of those expansive bills were introduced in New York and New Jersey, but also in Arizona, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and New Hampshire. A lot of legislation that is working to contract voting or restrict it is limiting mail voting. Others eliminate permanent absentee voting lists. A number involve restrictions on assisting voters. For example, who can assist in returning a voter's ballot? For example, while a South Carolina bill would impose a photo ID requirement for anyone returning another person's absentee ballot. So in other words, even to return the vote, an absentee ballot, states are putting in legislation that requires you to show voter ID. In conjunction with the Brennan Center's report on state voting proposals, there are a list of restrictive and expansive bills that they're tracking. As of February 19th, 2021, 253 bills with provisions that restrict voting access in 43 states, and 704 bills with provisions that expand voting access in a different set of 43 states. In some cases, a single bill can have provisions with both restrictive and expansive effects. So the Brennan Center's report makes it clear that the states are working very hard to introduce considerably more complex voter requirements around the country: voter registration, voter purges, et cetera. Some are proposing the expansion of access to voting. The point to keep in mind is that while these are numbers of bills that have been proposed, they've not been voted on yet. They've not been passed. So the thing to keep in mind about all of this is we're going to see an enormously more complicated array of voter legislation than was the case leading up to the presidential election of 2020, or they're trying to make it. And the passage of national legislation to address these kinds of changes and also to address the Supreme Court's County versus Holder decision, striking down Section 4 of the VRA is therefore necessary. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act would address some of these concerns as well. HR 1 and S1, the For the People Act, has already passed the House 220 to 2010. It addresses a number of issues associated with voting rights, which would set a national standard and invalidate a number of these new pieces of legislation. Provisions include same-day and automatic voter registration. This is of the provisions of the For the People Act. Same-day and automatic voter registration, election security, campaign finance reform, ethics, meaning the president and vice presidential candidates. Both candidates and holders of those offices would be required to publicly disclose previously 10 years of previous income tax returns. That's not clear. The point is that the president, who's a presidential candidate and a vice presidential candidate, as well as the person holding office as president and vice president, would be required to publicly disclose their previous 10 years of income tax returns, thereby avoiding the Trump problem that we've had for the last several years. So in addition to same-day and automatic voter registration, election security, campaign finance reform, ethics, statehood for the District of Columbia, my home town, and limiting gerrymandering through the use of state-level independent commissions for redistricting, rebalancing the Federal Election Commission to 5 commissioners are the terms of this HR 1 and S1. The HR 1 legislation has already passed the House, and the John Lewis would also have to pass, but the question remains, how would it be able to pass? How would either be able to pass the Senate? Ollie, how am I doing on time?
You can start wrapping up.
All right. So political experience and using election laws to increase voter registration, turning out the vote, mobilizing the vote has grown enormously in recent years. I have more than I'm going to have time to say, but this is the part I like. We saw Stacey Abrams and an array of voter organizations, some new, particularly in Georgia, created to address the challenges that Stacey Abrams faced during her 2018 campaign for governor. And I would argue it's almost become a kind of cottage industry in Georgia. Fair Fight, Fair Count, both founded by Abrams. And Fair Count includes groups like Faith Connections, which provide faith and innovation resources to religious organizations. That's my time. And Black Voters Matter, which we see LaTosha Brown and Cliff Albright being involved. But with Andra Gillespie on this panel, I won't try to say much more than, and this is literally in my text, more than the political coalition mobilization we saw in the runoffs on January 5th that elected both Reverend Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff. This demonstrated enormous talent and skill. The large numbers of new voting laws that are being passed have the intention of making sure this doesn't happen again. Warnock's term had 2 more years, so he must run again next year. And the new voting laws are intended to make sure he isn't reelected. I expect to see responses by that same set of political leaders to face the challenges that are ahead of us. I look forward to talking with the panel and hearing your comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane. Andra.
Thank you very, very much. To Gladys and Ollie and Don for inviting me to be a part of this panel, and also Diane for her nice segue. There, I think as evidenced by Diane's comments, there are many things to talk about. And we didn't discuss this ahead of time, but I assumed that one of the reasons why I was on this panel was because I was the Georgian on the panel. And so I'm gonna focus my comments on Georgia specifically. So here's my primary thesis about Georgia. I think there are many reasons to be excited about Georgia, but I get very, very annoyed every time somebody's like, Georgia's blue. I was like, no, Georgia's probably purple right now, not blue or red. And so we still have to sort of, remember our statistics and know that for right now, this is one data point. We are going to have to take many more years of data to know precisely where Georgia's going. But I think that the trajectory points into a direction of increased competitiveness for the next generation or so. One of the things that we can look at by looking at the past is we can look at the ways that Georgia has become more competitive over the course of the last decade. So in the slide that's here, I'm looking at presidential election results in Georgia. And so one of the things that we have been able to see since Barack Obama's candidacy in 2008 is that the margins in Georgia presidential elections had been narrowing over time. So George W. Bush won re-election comfortably in 2004, but those margins slipped to single-digit margins for Republican candidates in 2008, 2012, and 2016. And then, of course, we have Joe Biden's narrow election victory in 2020. This is not the only election where we see a narrowing of margins. We see the same thing in gubernatorial elections going back to 2006. So we see Sonny Perdue winning re-election by a comfortable margin in 2006, but those margins had started to increasingly narrow. And we know that Stacey Abrams only lost by 1.5 points in 2018. And then if we look at Senate races in Georgia, have had periods where Republicans have won comfortably, but the norm in the last 40 years has been that there have been periods of very narrow election victories. And so the lines here represent general election results, and then the bars are places where we have had runoff elections. And so one of the things that you'll note here is that in the 80s and early 90s, Senate races were decided by very, very narrow margins, razor thin margins, and in places where runoffs were actually mandated, they would run to runoffs. And we see the same thing happening, of course, in the 2020 election cycle. The reasons for the close elections are different today than they were in the 80s and early 90s. So in the 1980s, what we were seeing was the secular realignment that was in process, where Southern white Democrats were slowly shifting their party identification and their voting behavior towards the Republican Party. What we're seeing happening now is increasing competitiveness, but that competitiveness is born out of changing demographics within the state of Georgia. So this is what Georgia's electorate looked like in September of 2020. A little more than half of registered voters in the state were white. 30% of voters in the state were Black. About 6% of voters in Georgia were Asian American or Latinx. And if we put this into greater context, looking to the two previous presidential election cycles, what we see is that the white share of the population has been steadily decreasing. The Black share of the population has remained relatively steady over time, but we're also seeing this doubling of the Asian American and Latinx electorate over the course of almost a decade. And this is making it possible for Democrats to be able to be competitive, particularly in relation to neighboring states, which also have large African American populations, but don't have the same size Asian American and Latinx populations, and don't have the same proportion of liberal whites. So the vast majority of white voters in Georgia are Republicans, but there are more white Democrats in Georgia than there are in South Carolina or Alabama and Mississippi, and that's part of the reason why Georgia has become more competitive. We can talk about this more in the Q&A. I know I don't have much time, so I do want to provide some perhaps interesting and new data on the Senate runoffs. So one of the reasons why the Senate contest got so much attention, why it got all the media coverage in December, why the runoff race cost $750 million, was because partisan control of the Senate was at stake. If Senate control had already been determined either for the Democrats or the Republicans on November 3rd, we wouldn't have seen the same type of investment in the state or the same type of attention in the state. There's also sort of an issue of the vacuum. And so as the final two races of the 2020 cycle, everybody could focus all of their attention. So all the money flowed to Georgia, all of the media coverage flowed to Georgia because there really wasn't anything better to do. The big observation and the big takeaway on the runoffs, and I think this ties into the larger discussion about voter suppression, is that get out the vote efforts made the difference. And the idea that people of color were targeted in this election in ways that they're typically not targeted is really important. So in general, when you have a highly competitive environment where you have something close to parity between the number of Black Democrats and Republicans in a state generally, or in any election jurisdiction, the party with the best turnout operation is going to be the one that wins. And so you have to go back on those old Wolfinger and Rosenstone, Gerber and Green types of metrics to determine who's got the best setup and who's probably going to turn out the most. Here in this particular election, the Black outreach effort to voters was real and it was consequential. And in some ways, it might actually provide the keys to figuring out how to align some of these very regressive voter suppression efforts that are being proposed in state legislatures around the country and in Georgia in particular. So GOTV matters in the 2020 Senate runoffs. If we compare 2020 to 2008, in 2008, because Barack Obama was on the ballot in the presidential election, you get record Black turnout. And there was a libertarian candidate who was able to pull a sizable share of the vote. So that pulled the incumbent Saxby Chambliss below 50% of the vote, forcing a runoff. By the time we get back to the runoff election in 2008, turnout falls amongst infrequent voters in that December runoff. And so the normal equilibrium of Republicans comfortably winning election in Georgia kind of came into play, and Saxby Chambliss was able to win his runoff election pretty easily. Those were not the conditions of 2020. They weren't the conditions because Georgia's demographics had changed, its voter demographics had changed substantially in the 12-year period. And then also because of the importance of the race, Democrats were not going to sit idly by and let infrequent and low propensity voters stay home. They were going to do everything that they possibly could to get those voters to turn out the vote again. So both sides increased voter turnout in the general and in the runoff election through direct outreach. Just if we're looking in terms of absolute numbers, we can talk about the ways that turnout was lower than perhaps Republicans wanted, or perhaps it should have been in areas because of all of Donald Trump's distractions with election fraud and other types of issues. But the story of the 2020 cycle is that turnout goes up amongst all groups, and it goes up amongst all groups because at different points in the election cycle, you have both Democrats and Republicans engaging in retail politicking and GOTV efforts that we know increase voter turnout, regardless of the group that's being targeted. So Republicans during the general election cycle did direct face-to-face canvassing because of the high sort of reward that comes from direct canvassing. They did that despite public health efforts to try to keep people socially distant. And they did that sort of, in spite of the necessary health precautions. Democrats were more loath to do that during the general election cycle because, one, they wanted to be consistent in the message about COVID hygiene, and they probably didn't want to assume liability for a canvasser or a voter getting sick behind an interaction with a voter. By the time we get to the runoff election, though, Democrats realize that they can't leave canvassing on the table. They're going to have to use it. They're just going to have to be overly cautious in terms of making sure that they're protecting the voters that they're speaking to and that they're protecting their workers. And when you have $750 million, you, or at least a portion of that, you have the ability to be able to buy PPE to try to make sure that people are being safe as they're going out and canvassing. So they also had to confront lower than expected Black turnout. So turnout increases amongst all groups, but it doesn't rise as quickly amongst African-American groups. So Joe Biden ends up winning in Georgia, because of the fact that there were whites who were willing to vote Democratic, and because there were more Asian American and Latinx voters in the state who also were more likely than not to vote for Joe Biden. They couldn't risk that type of narrow margin in the runoff election. So they made sure to redouble their efforts to try to increase voter turnout amongst all people of color, but African Americans as well. So to show you what this may look like, I want to sort of show you some preliminary data from the James Weldon Johnson Institute Georgia Runoff Election Survey. It was basically an exit poll of sorts, 598 respondents. I haven't cleaned it yet, so that's why I'm not going to go into extra information about the demos. I collected it January 5th. I actually kept it open January 6th until, around the time that I realized that the Capitol insurrection was going on, in part to make sure that I got enough Republican respondents. So what I'm reporting here are just some descriptive stats about who reported receiving contact from a campaign. And then we ask voters to talk about the types of contacts they received prior to the general election and prior to the Senate runoff election. One of the things that you'll see is that Black respondents are reporting contact with campaigns at rates that are comparable to or even higher than the general overall sample. And so we're seeing evidence of the fact that Blacks were receiving a lot of targeted attention. And people who study political participation can attest to the fact that, using ANES data, that contact is usually much lower for people of color than it is for whites. And we know that contact is what increases voter turnout. So with nearly unlimited resources, Black voters got the attention that they should receive every election. And this actually ends up translating into a higher propensity to turn out to vote. So to conclude, here are sort of my thumb sketch implications of the 2020 election victories. So one, I want to reiterate the fact that Georgia is competitive. It's not necessarily Democratic. I'm going to need another few election cycles before I'm ready to say that Georgia has turned blue. We are in the middle of a General Assembly session where there are numerous bills that have been proposed that will try to restrict election access. One of them has passed one chamber. Crossover was last week, or earlier this week, excuse me. And so we'll see what eventually passes. But we also have to see, one, if this responsiveness continues. It shouldn't take being the last race in the country, and it shouldn't take getting an obscene amount of money to make sure that Get Out the Vote organizations have the materials and have the resources they need in order to be able to respond and to mobilize voters of color. So with that, I will end my comments, and I look forward to my colleagues' presentations.
Thank you so much, Andra. We are on fire now. Ishmael.
How you all doing? Today I'm going to be brief. I don't really have a whole lot of comments, and it's hard to follow Andra anyway with that wonderful presentation. So that was great. And I'm just going to talk a little bit more generally about the election and in particular party politics and so what that means for the sort of racialized nature of party politics today and how it sort of reflects some of the trends from the past and the sort of particularly the direction that the Republican Party is going in. And Diane alluded to this. It's sort of both consistent with what many in the sort of INCOPE community already knew, yet also disturbing because of the seeming direction and the sort of momentum that it seems to be taking on. And so I think what we've seen in this election more than anything else is that the American Republican Party is now officially the party of white people, right, and white America. I'm going to say it now. I'm going to cut the official ribbon for the Republican Party. Obviously, this comes as zero surprise to the people at INCOPE, right? However, I assure you that many of our colleagues outside of INCOPE are very much unwilling to admit this, even at this point. And so I think it's something that we all need to start working on, sort of making people aware of, in part because of the kind of dangerous implications of a party that is sort of centered on whiteness as its main agenda. We saw a party like that in the South before the 1960s, right? And we saw what happened there. But even there, the National Democratic Party was not was not unified, right, in its positions all the time, right? And so the shift of white Southerners to the Republican Party in the 80s and 90s and the growth of communities of color in the US since the 1960s, with that, the Democratic Party has become significantly more diverse, right? Whereas the Republican Party has become more white. Today, and I may be slightly off, but what I think the racial composition of the Democratic Party is like 60%, right? While the Republican Party is something like 85%, 60% white, while the Republican Party is something like 85% white. In the 1980s, they both were about 80-something% white, okay? And what happened from the 1980s to today is that the country got more diverse, and then the Democratic Party got more diverse, and the Republican Party did not, right? The Republican Party stayed this essentially white party. Now, what Trump saw was an opening, right? And he did this better than any of his Republican predecessors, except perhaps maybe Reagan, right? At appealing to whiteness in just this explicit way that many Republicans, thought would never be effective. He found that it was quite effective at bringing in a new set of voters. And again, he did this in these very not subtle ways. In terms of sort of bringing in a new set of white voters that previously hadn't either engaged in politics or supported the Republican Party. Now, what Georgia suggests to me is that Trump's strategy is not necessarily a path to, say, future success. Certainly, Georgia as a Southern state, it would be hard to sort of believe that they would support a Democratic candidate. And as Andrea pointed out, I mean, there's lots of reasons why we got the outcome that we did, but Georgia represents this interesting case of a coalition between, suburban whites and many of whom are northern transplants and people of color who united to sort of defeat Trump and, elect two Democratic senators, right? And again, the Black and Hispanic populations in Georgia have grown at several times the rate of the white population, and to the extent that there is white population growth, is from professionals moving into the Atlanta area. So I think Georgia represents some hope for the Democrat, but as Diane just mentioned, the Republican Party has now turned to disenfranchising Black voters, or at least those Black voters who don't support the Republican Party, because I think they're perfectly happy with Black people voting if they're gonna vote for the Republicans, just not the kind of Black people who are most Black people, right? The weird thing about this is that when the Republican Party is not sort of explicitly talking about taking Black rights away or using guns, or in fact, when they're not out there using guns to threaten Black protesters or to take over the Capitol, they're also now the victims, right? They're being censored, taxes are unfair to them, their guns are being taken away, all their rights apparently are being trampled upon. And all of this is couched in some language of political liberty, right? And the interesting thing is when you listen to it is it's the same political liberty that the founders of this country used. In fact, it's so similar that it reflects the same contradictions. For example, the founders often referred to themselves as slaves of the British Empire, right? But they own Black people, right? This is an important contradiction that what's his name at North Carolina? I think Bernard Boxill, right? The philosopher, right? He points out and what he says is, if I remember correctly from my class notes, that surely the founders could not have thought that their own situation was the same as Black Americans, right? And surely their Black Americans took every effort to point this out to them, right? Yet what I think we have today is that what the founders and the modern Republicans share is a particular view of liberty that means liberty for themselves, but not liberty for themselves, and this sort of other kind of perversive liberty that sort of entitles them to dominate other people, right? And I think this is what folks like Ted Cruz, and this goes beyond Trump, because I feel like this is what the kind of ideology that folks like Ted Cruz are getting sort of hooked on. This notion that, you know, this notion that they have that liberty entitles, their own liberty entitles them to trample the rights of others. I mean, obviously that's a sort of basic idea in American political thought, and that we all deal with, but they are pushing this idea. And once this gets connected to race, where does it go, right? And that's the concern I have, and that's the concern with the kind of the new white Republican Party, and what is it going to mean in the future? You know, how will they sort of define their own rights in relation to others? And I don't see that ending in a particularly democratic way, right? And this I think too relates to the sort of attacks on democracy that we see, that we've seen recently as well by the Republicans. Anyway, I'll stop there, and I'll let Vince get his time in.
Thank you so much, Ishmael. Vince, floor is yours.
Thank you, Ali. Thanks to the organizers of the panel, Sekou and Gladys and everyone else involved. I'm happy to be here, honored to be on the panel with the other panelists. I'll keep my comments informal and brief as well, so as to have at least some time for Q&A. They'll build on the excellent comments of the other panelists as well. What I basically want to talk about is to try to put some of the election results, the exit poll results in particular, in context, and to dispel some of the myths that were generated in the run-up to the election and the aftermath of the election as well. One of the core myths I think that was propagated was this notion that African Americans were starting to drift towards the Republican Party. I'm not the senior member on this panel, but I'm one of the senior members on this panel. And I mentioned that to say that I'm old enough to recognize that this refrain seems to emerge every election cycle. That Blacks, that they're on the cusp, that this is going to happen. They're about to move towards the Republican Party. But if you look at the exit poll data, there's really no reasons to sustain that particular argument. So just to be more specific, and I'm just doing this mostly with some notes here, but off of memory, in 2020, according to the National Election Poll exit poll, by the way, there were 2 exit polls in 2020. That's often overlooked. So, but I'll incorporate that into my commentary. So the National Election Poll exit poll found that 87% of African Americans nationally voted for the Democratic candidate, obviously Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and 12% voted for the Republicans. Now that does represent an increase from 2016, when 8% of Blacks were reported in the exit polls at least to have voted for Trump and Pence, and 89% were reported to have voted for Clinton. And if we only use our baseline as 2016, then I suppose it would be appropriate to say that there's movement. But as it turns out, we do have data that goes back before 2016, and you can find more than a few Republicans, including Bob Dole in 1996, who got 12% of the Black vote, and Ronald Reagan in 1980, who got 14% of the Black vote. And my point is simply that the number of African Americans who vote for Republican presidential candidates bounces around every election cycle, somewhere between 8% or so and 15% or so. So the notion that any one election cycle suggests movement towards the Republican Party is erroneous. It's not. I'm not aware of any evidence of that emerging based on the data that is available to us that dates back into the 1970s in terms of the exit polls, and far beyond that with other surveys. So I just want to dispel this rumor that there's evidence that African Americans are moving towards the Republican Party. They're not. The other bit of evidence I want to discuss is this. There was a lot of discussion. Oh, and by the way, the 87% that I made reference to, that is from the National Election Poll exit poll. But the Associated Press also had an exit poll, and they found that 90% of Blacks voted for for the Biden ticket, and I believe 9% voted for Trump. So you have to kind of pick and choose. I'm not going to make an argument as to which one of these is the better exit poll. The point is that they're both estimates. An exit poll, just like any other poll, is an estimate. And the estimate suggests that somewhere in the neighborhood of 87 to 90% of Blacks voted for the Democratic candidate. That does not represent any change over time. And the same comparable figures, by the way, played out for whites. It's usually in the neighborhood of 53 to 58%, a little higher during the Reagan years, sometimes it's slightly lower. But it's always been over 50%. And as everyone in this panel likely knows, no Democrat has managed to get a majority of the white vote since Lyndon Johnson. Another point I want to make, two other brief ones before concluding and hopefully opening this up to Q&A, is that there was a lot of talk about Black men. Like, oh my God, Black men are moving towards, what was the number? 18, 19% of Black men voted for Donald Trump in 2020. Now, again, that's based on one exit poll. That is the National Election Poll exit poll. The AP exit poll says it was 12%. And the AP exit poll, for what it's worth, is based on 100,000 cases. And the NEP poll is based on about 15,000. Doesn't necessarily mean one's better than the other. The point is that they're both estimates. But let's for the moment assume that that 18, 19% figure is correct, and that only about 79% of Black men voted for Joe Biden in 2020, which again, that's only based on one poll. Even if that is true, let's put those figures in context. It would mean that African Americans are far and away, African American men, the most Democratic constituency in the American electorate, with the exception of Black women. They are more Democratic than Latinas, than Asian American women, than any other constituency you could identify. So it would be a mistake to oversell those figures with respect to Black men and support for the Republican ticket. By the way, the figure for the Associated Press for Black men would be 87%, not 79. So which one of those is correct? I'm not sure. They're both estimates, could be somewhere in the middle. We're still awaiting the American National Election Study results. They'll provide some perhaps additional leverage on triangulating on this number. But that number is big, whichever one you believe. Another point of comparison, if most would agree that white evangelicals are a solidly Republican constituency, and that's because they are. But if you actually look at the exit polls, the same National Election Poll exit poll will report that 74% of white evangelicals voted for Donald Trump, and that is a big number. But it's actually, that would mean that they are less supportive of the Republican ticket than are Black men of the Democratic ticket. So no one is going around saying, what's going on with white evangelicals? Why are they shifting to the Democratic Party? Because they're not shifting to the Democratic Party, and neither are Black men, or that is to say with respect to the Republican Party. So if there's any takeaway message I'm trying to convey here, is that we need to have a longer time horizon when we evaluate exit poll data. It isn't just the most recent previous election. In order to get a sense about trend data, this is kind of a point that Andra was making as well. And we also need to recognize that none of these exit polls are descending from the mountaintop. All of them are based on flawed, fallible estimates derived from surveys. And we need to triangulate in order to get a sense about what is the truth out there. There's no, it is true that Black women are more Democratic than Black men. It's also true that Black people are more Democratic by a healthy margin than any other constituency. And the difference between Black men and Black women, and there is a difference, but that difference is smaller than the difference between any Black male, female constituency relative to just about every other constituency. And I guess the last couple of points I'll make here in an effort to leave room for Q&A is to build on what Ishmael was saying as well. And this builds on some of Diane's comments also. The party system in the United States, I never turn down an opportunity when I'm on a panel like this to drive home the point that the party system in the United States isn't just unhealthy and fragile in a variety of different ways, but it is remarkably racialized. And it has been since long before Donald Trump came along, and it will be long after he passes from the scene. Meaning that something verging on unanimity of support for the Democratic Party among African Americans and lopsided support for the Republican Party among whites. And that is even more true, by the way, in the South. Some of this was embedded in Andra's comments. I was looking at the exit poll in preparation for my comments this morning. The exit polls from Georgia, the 2020 special election, found that I think it was 93%, some number like that, something starting with a 9 of Black people. 90%, I think it was for Black men, 95% for Black women, voted for the 2 Democratic Senate candidates. And the numbers were 79 and like 74% for white men and white women. That is outrageous. Outrageous in the sense that when the most divisive social cleavage in American society, which is and has always been race, maps onto our party system such that knowing someone's racial or ethnic background, especially in a place like Georgia, tells you who they are likely to vote for. That is a recipe for disaster. And that is where we are at this moment in this country. As Ishmael was indicating, the Democratic Party is remarkably ethnically and racially and religiously diverse. I believe something like 51, I looked at the 2020 ANES data, the pre-election poll data has been released. 51%, I believe, of the Democratic Party is made up of non-Hispanic whites. 20% are Blacks. Now for Republicans, those figures are, I think it's like 81% are white and 3% are Black. So you have a largely, overwhelmingly, disproportionately white party in the Republican Party. There can be no dispute about that. There's no editorializing on my part as I make that comment. It is simply an objective reality. Upwards of 80% of the Republican Party is white, even though less than 2/3 of the American population is non-Hispanic white. And 20% of the Democratic Party is white, even though Blacks represent 13% of the general population. So Blacks are overrepresented in the Democratic Party and whites are overrepresented in the Republican Party. That is a problem. And my final comment will simply be, I recently read a paper by Larry Bartels where he sought to assess the extent to which this phenomenon that I just described, the ethnically and racially heterogeneous Democratic Party and the ethnically and racially homogenous Republican Party, how that factors into what we have been seeing recently, which is this movement away from embracing democratic norms. Obviously, that came to a head in particular on January 6th with the insurgency, the effort to essentially overthrow the American government on that date. The Bartels reading, I really urge you to find it. It was in the Proceedings for the National Academy of Sciences, and it demonstrates that the single most important factor driving support among Republicans for anti-democratic norms is their anxiety, their concerns, what he calls ethnic antagonism, meaning their fears about immigrants, their fears about Latinos, and of course, because we're always part of the mix, their concerns about African Americans. So it isn't just that we have 2 racially distinguishable and distinctive parties in this country, but that reality is driving this push to move away from the support of democratic norms. It is extremely dangerous. As political scientists, it's our job to draw attention to these facts. And I just wanted to underscore that in my comments this morning, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vince. Thank all of the panelists. Your presentations were complimentary, outstanding, and provocative. I would like to ask Angela, our tech person, and Sekou how much time we have, because we officially have until 12:15, and that's only about 7 minutes. So if we have more than 7 minutes, let me know. But in the meantime, I would encourage the panelists to look to the chat for questions and points that they would like to elaborate on. And so while I wait for more information, I will ask each of the panelists to respond briefly to questions in the chat or to any point that you want to elaborate on. So Diane, I'll start with you. And Sekou and Angela, if we can go over, if we can go beyond 12:15, let me know. If we cannot, I understand.
Well, this is a wonderful panel, and I'll be working to get my students to see it because the Facebook Live and the webinar somehow is not working well, but so much to hear and so much to ponder. The whole point about my initial question is, do we have a country that believes in democracy? I would argue African Americans actually believe in democracy, which is what we've been working on, we collectively, historically, for the last several hundred years. And particularly, of course, since the Civil War and Civil Rights Movement, et cetera. The whole Civil Rights Movement is that marching up to Jericho. And, you know, we naively thought that the election of Obama symbolized significant change. And we've had to come to terms with the fact that it did not, that it simply, it generated a reaction to the possibility of an African-American leader for the country as a whole, which people rapidly began to come to terms with. And by that, I mean, began to react negatively to, as we saw in the 2010 elections, the rise of the Tea Party, and then the support for Trump. But as Vince said, the concern about race occurred and was part of the American political environment and political values long before Trump. This, you know, could not disagree with that. So we have a really challenging time ahead of us. And it's not as if we get to think about, some people will argue that we do get to think about alternatives to quote unquote democracy, perhaps looking at nationalist options, but the broader segment of the American population, the African-American population, is going to be focusing on the democratic participation. So I'll leave it at that since we have so little time.
Diane, thank you so much. We do have extra time, so that is good. I want to encourage the panelists and the attendees, and I think we're hovering around 75 participants or attendees, to consider a notion that I floated years ago, that we consider the United States an authoritarian regime, a competitive authoritarian regime, a pluralist authoritarian regime, that we take that into consideration based not only on our experience as African Americans, but the experience of women and the impact of domestic and foreign policy of our governments over 200 years. Unfortunately, we've done devastating things, the government has. But I just wanted to throw that in. Andra, your comments in response to any question or whatever you would like to elaborate on.
Okay, so wait a minute, I just saw a question, one question. So I see a question first from Elsie Scott, who asked whether or not there's a comparison between North Carolina and Georgia. And then Wendy Smooth asked a question, mobilization efforts. Okay. So to answer Dr. Scott's question, you know, I think that that's the big question. I think that there are possibly a lot of similarities between Georgia and North Carolina. And the competitiveness that I'm thinking of going forward is a competitiveness where I don't expect Democrats to sweep statewide elections for the next decade. In fact, I think it's a very real possibility that you're going to see Republicans win their fair share or more of a share sort of statewide elections going forward, but where races are just going to be close. Those margins, they're not going to enjoy these comfortable, you know, more than 5, more than 10-point margins. Things are going to be decided very closely. Democrats will win some things, but I expect that Republicans are going to win some things either. You know, if it doesn't prove to be true, I mean, I think the question is, do we compare Georgia to Virginia or North Carolina? So in Virginia, once Democrats started to win certain statewide offices, they went on a roll and then continued to start winning other things, culminating with the Democratic takeover of the General Assembly. And I'm not quite sure that that the state where I live now is going to be quite like the state where I grew up, but we'll have to wait and see what happens and observe that over future election cycles. So let's see, there are more questions kind of coming in. So I've already lost my place in the chat. To go back to, okay. So the mobilization efforts on the ground, it's really hard for somebody who does like to be out in the field to have to stay home because of COVID. So what I know was that there were specific targeted outreach efforts to African-American, to Latinx, and to Asian American communities. Some of this was, of course, being coordinated by the campaign. So the campaigns themselves were very intentional in terms of their outreach efforts. You know, whether or not this actually leads to an enduring cross-racial coalition was hard for me to observe from home. I'm just sort of putting this together based on emails that I was getting. But, you know, there is the possibility for Georgia Democrats who are diverse to want to continue to work together. And there was some evidence of that already, just in terms of how the elites were responding to one another. You know, the big place where everyone's going to be really interesting to see what that looks like is in Gwinnett County. So Gwinnett County, you know, is one of the largest counties of the state, if not the largest, northeast of Atlanta, where you actually have very large populations of everybody in the same spot. So you've got, you know, you've got as many Hispanics as you do African Americans. You have a large Asian American population. You still have a, you know, non-trivial white population in this particular county. And sort of what those efforts look like in other types of venues looks different. So you see gains for Black or Hispanic mayors winning, you know, office in towns that you would have never imagined 20 years ago winning them. But, you know, efforts in terms of like what it looks like when we're starting to get down to county commission seats, when we get down to school board efforts, other kinds of things. Like, you know, I am aware of the fact that, you know, there was pending litigation, or at least attempted litigation to get Asian American representation on the Gwinnett County School Board. I was not aware of, not saying that it didn't happen, any efforts to try to join those efforts with those of African Americans who would also be seeking representation as well.
Thank you so much, Andra. Ishmael.
I would just build on the point Diane made about the racial differences in beliefs about democracy. I think I saw a poll somewhere that said just that Blacks were more supportive. But the question is that just reflecting the kind of partisan divisions that exist across race? But whatever the point is, it raises other important questions just generally about, you know, whether white Americans as a whole were ever supportive of democracy, right? The idea may have just been that they supported it because it allowed them to be in control. And as the Republicans are seeing that democracy is not a means for them to sort of maintain that control, you know, many white Americans, particularly this sort of more nationalist type that are gravitating towards the Republican Party, are saying, well, you know, this is that whole talk about it's a republic, not a democracy, right? How do we create a government that allows the minority to rule, right? That's what that is, right? And so, again, this is all the kind of disturbing rhetoric around party politics and race that is that Vince was pointing out as well. It's just it's not looking good.
It is very disturbing. Welcome to America, Vince.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I saw there was one question in the chat, I think from Mike Minta, about the Associated Press exit poll and whether they took into account early voting. The short answer is yes, they do. You can go to their website, and this is not an endorsement, by the way, of their methodology or anything about them or any other exit poll. But they, as is the case with the National Election Poll exit poll, in both cases, they took into account early voting. And briefly on this issue of democracy, I mean, I guess I agree with all the panelists have been saying that the ways in which it intersects with race. you know, I've been reading recently a lot about the white Southern response to the Reconstruction, which, by the way, was during the time period when Blacks represented a majority in some of those states. South Carolina, Louisiana, Mississippi, Black people were the majority. Whites weren't so big on democracy under those circumstances. And we know what happened then. So Blacks aren't a majority in any of these Southern states now, but as Andra pointed out, they have been able to develop these multiracial coalitions, which can put together, if not a winning majority, then at least a winning plurality. And when that happens, I guess we're seeing the response that's unfolding in Georgia. So the interesting thing from my perspective is how much has not changed since Reconstruction to the 21st century. That people think democracy is great until they lose. Then all of a sudden it's not so great anymore.
I thank you, Vince. We have until at least 12:30. So we have at least 10 more minutes. So I would encourage at least one more round of responses to comments, responses to questions, elaborations. I'm going to take my moderator privilege and ask folks to respond or comment on, if you will, the role of the Electoral College in presidential elections, in our description analysis of our political system as democratic, as you respond to the questions in the chat and the Q&A. Diane, we can start with you again.
Okay, the role of the Electoral College. Well, we all expected the Electoral College to be the savior in 2016. That didn't work then, and we almost lost it again in 2020. So I suspect that will not get the Republican Party to agree to terminate the Electoral College. And some members of the Democratic Party would be more likely to want to get rid of it and move towards, you know, a simple numerical vote of voters. But I don't know. I have to think about my own views on this question. Now, I guess I should respond to Valeria Chapman's comment about add-in states where Indiana, which voted for Obama in 2008, Republicans are coordinated to shrink the non-white electorate in national elections, which, I mean, they've done that, you know, in Indiana since before I arrived, which was in 2006. And the reason that Obama won in 2008 was because of the northwest corner of the state, St. Joe County, Lake County, the counties closest to Chicago. The Obama party specifically targeted that section of the state because they knew that there was a large enough minority population, Blacks, but really strong Democratic voters, allied with labor unions and so forth. They targeted that section, and people who were longtime Democrats, people in the neighborhood where I moved into South Bend, looked at me, you know, with crossed eyes when I told them that's what Obama was doing, you know, as in they didn't think it was possible. It was a strong enough vote in the Northwest County corner that it did work, but it did not work in 2012. And it has not, you know, the state has gone very, very red since then. And in fact, our Democratic previous Democratic Congressman, Joe Donnelly, who became a senator, defeated it in the Senate race in 2016, and was his House seat was taken by a person whose name I will not mention, but is, you know, strong Republican, who doesn't even have town hall meetings. Talk about, you know, democracy. She doesn't have town hall meetings. So Indiana is a state that where I live. That's a problem state as far as I'm concerned. Enough. And let me say that I'll have to leave a little earlier because I have another panel at 12:45, so I have to take a break.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I will ask for any closing comments from Don and Sekou at 12:30. Go ahead, Andra.
Oh, well, I look forward to hearing what Vince would say about this. So I see a question about if Colin Powell ran for president, how much of the Black male vote would he get? I mean, I think the bigger problem is Colin Powell couldn't get nominated by the Republican Party today if he tried. And so there's this larger sort of, issue about what polarization looks like and how that's actually snuffed out, how that has snuffed out moderate voices within each of the party's coalitions. If Powell were miraculously nominated for the Republican Party, how much, Black support would he get? I think back to what the late Herman Cain said when he was running in 2012, and he claimed he could get 30% of the Black vote. And it was like, yeah, no, that's probably not going to happen, even if you are Black. So, partisanship matters in part because of both parties' histories on race. And so, yeah, perhaps a well-respected Black Republican might be able to do marginally better than what your typical Black Republican candidate could get. So maybe something in the lines of what Michael Steele did in Maryland when he ran for the US Senate. But I think you would still see the vast majority of Blacks voting Democratic, because there's this longstanding history that can't be overcome with one candidate or one election cycle. And one of the things that I think is actually really important to point out when Diane mentioned HB1 is like, this is sort of like textbook why Black people are Democrats and textbook why Black people like the federal government more than they like state and local governments. So we're seeing these regressive state policies going into effect. And right now, the only possible recourse against them is, especially with the courts not being sort of, very amenable to addressing voting rights in any sort of sympathetic way, is to go and get the legislature to invoke the authority that they have via the 15th Amendment to try to preempt the states from being able to sort of enact some of these very sort of, harsh and suppressive measures. So, when you're thinking about fundamental ideas of, do Black people like big or small government? Big government has worked for Black people because it's often been federal intervention that has actually gotten us freedoms that have been actionable. And so for the Republican Party to overlook this right now is one, has long-term implications, not only for them being able to recruit minority voters, but also it's going to end up shooting themselves in the foot, because one of the things that we don't talk about is, before this election cycle, Republicans didn't have a problem with vote by mail. They just have a problem with it this time because they lost, because their standard bearer made a very stupid strategic calculation that blew up in his face. And so instead of blaming him for making a bad strategic decision that everybody followed, they're like, okay, we're just going to change all of the rules. And so this is blatantly transparent.
Thank you, Andra. Ishmael and Vince, you have about 2 minutes each.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is just regard to your question about the Electoral College. I mean, my sense is, again, the Republican Party in particular wants whatever works for it, gets it the most power, right? And so they will support this. I mean, the Electoral College, my sense is one of these state-based government proposals that the founders had here that sort of was meant to balance out sort of popular decision-making. But in fact, it again gave small states greater political power. And so, today that matches up well for the Republicans and advantages them. Thus, they will support it. My sense is they would be wanting to get rid of it if it didn't support if it didn't advantage them electorally. So, but again, it's not the most democratic system, at least if we think of democracy as sort of the individual, the power of citizens, because that sort of, reduces the power of the citizens and disaggregates it by the states. And so that's my take on it. If we want democracy, maybe we get rid of it, but more democracy. But if we want to, if it's all about winning, like the Republicans seem to think everything is, then yeah, they want to keep it. So.
Vince.
Sure, very quickly. I think I'm on the same page as the other panelists with respect to the Electoral College. I think it's really hard to generate a rationale for why the people in Wyoming or Montana should have disproportionate voting power to people in New York or Texas or Florida or California. So one does not even have to raise the specter of the partisan or racial implications to see that there's something fundamentally unfair about the Electoral College, particularly if we adhere to this notion that one person, one vote is how democracy should be constructed, because the Electoral College explicitly runs counter to that principle. And I guess the last comment, I think there was a question about Colin Powell running for president. I agree with Andra that it's unlikely in the modern Republican Party he would get the nomination, but let's assume for the moment that he did. I mean, I don't think it would make as big a difference. We had a Black Senate candidate in Michigan running in this past election cycle, John James, and he ran about as well as Donald Trump did. And I know Tim Scott in South Carolina doesn't exactly generate majority Black support as a Republican senator. So there's a reason the parties are racialized in terms of their supporters, and it dates back to well, the 15th Amendment or before. And it can't be reduced to the demographics of the contemporary candidates. It's a fair question, the one that emerged in the chat, but I think it's to the extent that individuals buy into it, I think it's kind of a surface view of what's driving the partisan division in the electorate. It's not based on I mean, if you run a Democratic, well, I'll put it this way. In Michigan, we had a white Democratic candidate running against a Black Republican candidate, and Blacks didn't like divide or significantly move in the direction of the Black Republican candidate, precisely because they're voting, as Andra pointed out, for parties that have reputations that they have built over time with respect to their responsiveness to various groups in the society. So I wouldn't expect Colin Powell or anybody else who, whatever their demographic background, to dramatically undercut the patterns that have emerged and been solidified over generations.
If I could quickly add to that, I was just looking at the literature on this a few days ago, and it's hard to say because you don't know. Vince is right, and you don't know exactly like who Black Americans in a particular election are voting for, right? And because we don't really have that data, but what we other than election polls, but we do know turnout, and the evidence I think is from turnout is that Blacks vote at higher rates for just generally Democratic candidates, but turnout more for Democratic candidates. And if there's like a unique candidate running, like Black Republicans do nothing to increase Black turnout, whereas a Black Democrat will increase turnout even over a white Democrat if that Black candidate was the first, right? But only a Black Democrat, not a Black Republican. They do nothing to increase Black turnout.
Thank you so much. We have come to the end. Diane, Andra, Ishmael, Vince, I really appreciate your contributions. I hope we can do it again sometime. I want to encourage everyone listening to check out the other panels, the other sessions. I am very excited about the next 2 days. Our president, Sekou, did you want to make any closing comments?
No, just really thanks to all the panelists, and we did live stream Facebook, but for whatever reason, I think folks had trouble accessing it. So we're going to try to troubleshoot it today, and it is live streaming, and we'll try to get it to folks who are interested in seeing that video. Yeah, thanks to all the panelists and the conference co-chairs. Just a few announcements. We have a business meeting tonight at 7 p.m. Our founder symposium is tomorrow. They'll be honoring Dr. Lucius Barker and Dr. E. Wally Miles. We do have a photo booth in which you could take pictures celebrating your attendance here. It's a little bit finicky, so you have to disable the pop-up blockers in order to fully access that, or we can send you a link if you want to take advantage of that. Just other kind of tidbits. The conference portal works better. It works. It has trouble working on Internet Explorer, so it works better on other web browsers. Our awards event is tomorrow evening. And also look at the exhibit booths that we set up, particularly our membership booth and also our INCOPES booth that highlight some of the activities. And then finally, tomorrow during the lunchtime hour, we have a co-sponsored event with the American Political Science Association. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sekou.
Thank you.
Sekou. And again,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
You were on. I appreciate you and enjoy the conference.
Take care. Bye-bye.